Hi everyone, welcome back to Think and Speak English. I'm Adam, and it is really great to have you here with us today.
And I'm Julia. This is episode 9, and today we are going into a world that a lot of people find genuinely stressful, even in their first language.
Meetings!
Meetings, yes. That word alone can make people take a deep breath.
And in English, when you add the layer of language on top of everything else that's already happening in a meeting, it can feel like a lot. You're trying to follow what people are saying. You're trying to think of something useful to contribute. You're watching for the right moment to speak. And you're doing all of that in a language that isn't your first.
That is a lot, and we want to help with that today. Not by turning you into a corporate robot who speaks in perfect formal phrases, but by helping you feel comfortable and natural in English language meetings, so that you can actually focus on the content of the meeting, rather than spending all your energy just trying to keep up.
Because that's the real goal, isn't it? When you feel confident with the language of meetings, you can actually bring your ideas, your expertise, your perspective, and that's what meetings are really for.
Exactly. So let's start by just talking about meetings for a bit. Adam, do you like meetings?
Honestly, it depends. I think a well-run meeting is actually quite satisfying. When there's a clear purpose, when people are prepared, when it ends with some kind of decision or direction. I find those quite energizing.
Okay. And a poorly run meeting?
A poorly run meeting it's like arriving at a destination and realizing you didn't actually need to go there.
That's a good way to put it. I think a lot of people feel that way. And I think one of the reasons meetings can feel so exhausting is that the language of meetings, the way people talk in professional settings, it has its own kind of grammar, its own patterns and conventions. And if you don't know those patterns, you can feel like you're always slightly on the outside.
Right. Like everyone else knows the rules of the game and you're still reading the instructions.
Which is such a frustrating place to be, especially when you actually have something valuable to say.
So what are the most common challenges, do you think, for learners specifically, when they're in an English language meeting?
I think the first one is just speed. Meetings move fast. People talk over each other. Ideas come up and get dropped and come back again. And if you're processing the language as well as the content, you can fall behind quite quickly.
And then by the time you've fully understood something and thought of a response, the conversation has already moved on. So you stay quiet, even though you had something to say.
Yes. And then there's the challenge of not knowing how to enter the conversation. In a meeting, you can't just start talking whenever you feel like it. There are social cues. There are moments where it's appropriate to speak, and moments where it isn't. And reading those cues in a foreign language and culture is genuinely hard.
And then there's the vocabulary. Meetings have their own vocabulary. Words like agenda, action points, stakeholders, take this offline, loop back, circle back. And if you don't know what those phrases mean, you can miss important information.
Right, so we're going to cover all of that today. The vocabulary, the timing, the phrases. And we're going to do it through conversation and role play, so it sounds and feels natural.
Let's start with the very beginning of a meeting, because how a meeting starts often sets the tone for everything that follows. And there are some really consistent patterns in how English language meetings begin.
Right, so usually there's a moment of informal chat first, a warm-up, especially if not everyone knows each other well, or if people are joining from different locations. Someone might say, "How is everyone doing?" Or, "Thanks for joining. I know it's early for some of you."
And that small talk moment, brief as it is really important. It creates a sense of connection before the work begins. It signals that this is a human conversation, not just an information exchange.
And then someone, usually the person who called the meeting, transitions from that warm-up into the formal start. And there are some nice phrases for that transition. Things like, okay, shall we get started? Or, right, let's dive in. Or, a slightly more formal version. Thank you all for coming. Let's get started.
And then they usually state the purpose of the meeting, because a good meeting opening tells people immediately why they're there. So the purpose of today's meeting is to, or, we're here today to discuss, or, I've called this meeting because I wanted to get everyone's input on.
Right. And that clarity at the start is a real gift to everyone in the room. Because then people know what kind of meeting it is. Are they there to make a decision, to share information, to brainstorm, to review progress? Those are all different kinds of meetings, and they require different kinds of participation.
That's a really good point. The kind of meeting shapes how you should engage. In a decision-making meeting, you need to come with a view. In an information-sharing meeting, you might mostly be listening. In a brainstorm, anything goes.
And in professional English meetings, it's quite normal for the chair, the person running the meeting, to explicitly tell people what kind of engagement is expected. I'd love to hear everyone's thoughts on this. Or, I just have a few updates to share, and then we can open it up for questions.
So if you're listening for those cues at the start of a meeting, you get a lot of useful information about what's expected of you, about the level of formality, about the pace.
Let's do a quick role play. Just the opening of a meeting. I'll be the person running it, and Adam, you're joining as a team member.
Sure. Ready?
Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for making the time. I know Mondays are busy. How's everyone doing? Adam, how was your weekend?
Pretty good. Thanks. Nice and quiet, which I needed. You?
Good. Thank you. Okay. Right. Let's get started. I don't want to keep you too long. So the purpose of today's meeting is to do a quick progress check on the Henderson project and to make a decision on the timeline for the next phase. I'd love to hear from everyone, so please do jump in as we go. Shall we start with where things are currently?
Yes, absolutely. So, from my side, we've completed about 70% of the initial research phase. We're slightly behind where I'd hoped to be, but I think we're on track to have everything ready by end of the month.
Okay, pause there. Let's just look at what happened in that opening. There was a small social moment, then a clear transition, then a statement of purpose, and then an explicit invitation to participate.
Right. I'd love to hear from everyone, so please do jump in as we go. That phrase is doing a lot of work. It tells people that contributions are welcome, that they don't need to wait to be formally called upon.
And as a participant, when you hear that kind of invitation, you can relax a little because you know you're expected to speak. It's not going to be out of place if you do.
And notice what I did when I gave my update. I didn't just give a number. I said, "from my side," which is a phrase that anchors the update to me specifically. And I acknowledged the delay, but I also reassured. Slightly behind, but on track.
That kind of update, acknowledging the reality, but ending on a forward-looking note, is very typical in professional English meetings. It's honest, without being alarming.
Let's talk about expressing ideas in a meeting, because this is something a lot of learners find difficult. It's one thing to answer a direct question. It's another to voluntarily offer an idea when nobody has specifically asked you.
Right, and there's a timing element. You have to find the right moment. And then there's a language element. How do you signal that you have something to add?
In English language meetings, there are some really useful phrases for signaling that you want to speak. Things like, "Could I just add something here?" Or, if I can just come in on that point, or I just wanted to raise something related to what you said.
And those phrases do a few things at once. They get people's attention. They signal that you're connecting to what's already been said, not just redirecting. And they're polite. They're not just talking over someone.
Which is so important. Talking over people in a meeting is one of the fastest ways to create friction, even if what you're saying is really valuable.
And if you're in a video call, which is so common now, the challenge is even greater because the cues are harder to read. You can't see someone's body language as clearly, and the delays in the audio can make timing even trickier.
So, on a video call, it's especially helpful to use verbal signals. Things like just quickly or sorry to jump in before you start speaking, just to create that moment of transition.
Let's role-play a meeting moment where someone wants to add an idea. I'll be midpoint and Adam. Try to come in naturally.
Okay.
So, based on the current data, I think the most logical next step is to focus our energy on the UK market. That's where we're seeing the strongest growth signals. And I think we have a real opportunity there.
Can I just come in on that? I completely take your point about the UK, and I don't want to complicate things unnecessarily. But I was actually looking at some figures from the German market last week, and there's something interesting happening there too. I wonder if it's worth at least keeping an eye on it, even if we don't make it a priority right now.
That's a fair point. Do you want to share those figures with the group?
Yes, absolutely. I can send them over after the meeting. Or, if it's useful, I can take 2 minutes to summarize now.
Let's do the summary now. If you can keep it brief, that sounds useful.
So a few things there. I said, can I just come in on that? To signal I wanted to speak. Then I acknowledged Julia's point first before introducing my own idea. And I framed my idea gently. I wonder if it's worth at least keeping an eye on it. Not, we should definitely do this.
Which is that polite disagreement spirit from episode 6. You're not challenging the direction. You're just adding a data point for consideration.
And then I offered options. I can send them over after, or I can summarize now. That kind of offer is really professional. It shows you're prepared and you respect people's time.
And notice how I responded. Let's do the summary now, if you can keep it brief. That's a meeting chair keeping things moving, but also being flexible and genuinely interested.
Let's talk about asking questions in meetings. Because questions are such an important part of meetings, and there are different kinds of questions for different purposes.
Right. There are clarifying questions where you're checking your understanding. There are probing questions where you're exploring an idea more deeply. And there are procedural questions where you're asking about process or next steps.
And each of those has its own kind of language. For clarifying questions, some really useful phrases are, sorry, could you say a bit more about what you mean by, or, just to make sure I understand, are you saying that? Or, could you clarify what you mean when you say?
And those are completely acceptable in any professional meeting. Nobody should make you feel bad for asking for clarification. It's actually a sign of engagement. It means you were paying attention.
Right, and if you feel uncomfortable asking for clarification in the meeting itself, you can always do it afterward. Could I just follow up with you on one thing after the meeting? That's a very natural thing to say.
But honestly, if something is unclear to you, it's probably unclear to at least one other person in the room. So asking the question is often doing everyone a favor.
And for probing questions, which are deeper questions, phrases like, what would that mean in practice? Or, how do you see that working given our current resources? Or, what assumptions are we making there? Those are all really valuable things to ask. They show that you're thinking critically about the ideas being discussed.
And they contribute to the quality of the meeting. A meeting where nobody asks probing questions is a meeting where things get agreed without being properly examined. and that leads to problems later.
So, asking good questions is not just useful for you as a learner, it's genuinely valuable for the meeting itself.
Let's do a longer role play, a fuller meeting moment. We'll be two colleagues discussing a proposal, and we'll try to cover a few different meeting situations. Clarifying, agreeing, gently pushing back, and summarizing.
Let's do it. Okay, so I've had a chance to look over the proposal you sent, and overall I think there's a lot of good thinking here. I wanted to discuss a few points before we move forward. Is that okay?
Of course. Please go ahead.
Great. So the first thing I wanted to ask about is the budget on page 4. There's a line item for external consultants, and it's quite significant. Can you tell me a bit more about who you're thinking of and what they'd be doing?
Sure. So the idea is to bring in a specialist for the data analysis phase. We don't currently have that expertise in-house, and I felt it would be more efficient to use someone external rather than trying to build that capability ourselves for a single project.
That makes sense. And I don't disagree with the logic. I just want to make sure we've explored the internal options first. I know the data team is quite stretched at the moment, but I'm wondering if there might be 1 or 2 people who could take this on with some support.
That's fair, I'll admit. I didn't go back to the data team before putting the budget together. I can definitely check with them before we finalize anything.
That would be great. And I'm not saying the external option is wrong. If the internal capacity isn't there, then yes, bring in someone external. I just want to make sure we've done that check first.
Absolutely. Understood.
The second point I wanted to raise is the timeline. You've got the project completing by end of Q2, and I want to make sure I understand correctly, because I thought there was a dependency on the IT system upgrade, which I believe is now scheduled for mid-Q2. Am I right about that?
You might be right, actually. I hadn't factored that in explicitly. That could affect the testing phase in particular.
Right? So it might be worth building in a bit of buffer around that, or at least mapping out the dependency clearly so we know what the risk is.
Yes, I'll add that to the revised version. Good catch.
Okay, and other than those 2 points, I think the proposal is really solid. The approach is well-reasoned, the objectives are clear, and I think it addresses the right problem. So I'm broadly supportive. We just need to tighten up those 2 areas.
Thank you. That's really helpful. So to summarize what we've agreed, I'll go back to the data team to check internal capacity before confirming the external consultant budget, and I'll map out the IT dependency and adjust the timeline if needed. Does that capture it?
Yes, exactly. And if you can get me the revised version by the end of the week, that gives us time to review before the steering group meeting.
Perfect. I'll aim to have it to you by Thursday.
Great, thank you. Okay, let's just look at that conversation, because there was a lot happening. First, I started with a positive framing. There's a lot of good thinking here before raising any concerns.
Which sets a collaborative tone and makes the concerns easier to hear.
Then I asked a clarifying question. Can you tell me a bit more about... Not accusatory, just curious.
And when you got the answer, you acknowledged it. That makes sense, and I don't disagree with the logic. Before introducing a nuance.
Right, because I don't disagree with the logic is a really elegant move. It says, you're not wrong in principle, but there's something to explore here.
And then at the end, when I summarized, I named the 2 specific actions and asked for confirmation. Does that capture it? That's a great closing move in a meeting. It checks that both people understood the same things.
And that confirmation step is so important, because you can have a long, productive conversation, and then both walk away with a slightly different understanding of what was decided. The verbal summary prevents that.
Let's talk about agreeing in meetings, because agreeing sounds simple. But in professional English, there are many different ways to agree, and they carry different weight.
Right. A very enthusiastic yes, absolutely, that's exactly right, is quite different from a measured yes, I think that's a reasonable approach.
And both are forms of agreement. But the first one sounds like you've been waiting to hear that idea. And the second sounds like you've thought about it and concluded it's sensible.
In professional meetings, measured agreement is often actually more powerful than enthusiastic agreement, because it sounds like you've evaluated the idea, not just liked it.
So phrases like, I think that's a reasonable approach, or I can support that, or I'm comfortable with that direction, signal thoughtful agreement.
And then on the more enthusiastic end, you have, I think that's a great idea, or I'm really glad you raised that, or that's exactly the kind of thinking we need here, which are warmer and more encouraging.
And choosing between them depends on the situation. If you want to encourage someone, especially someone junior or who might feel uncertain, warmer agreement is really valuable. If you want to signal professional alignment, measured agreement works well.
And what about disagreement in a meeting? We covered this quite a bit in episode 6, but it's worth looking at it specifically in the meeting context.
Yes, because the stakes can feel higher in a meeting, especially if there are senior people present, or if the person whose idea you're questioning is someone you want to maintain a good relationship with.
Right. So the language becomes even more careful. Some really useful phrases for professional disagreement in meetings are, I hear what you're saying, and I want to make sure I understand it fully before I respond, which buys you time and signals fairness.
Or, I think there might be some challenges with that approach, particularly around, which is specific and constructive. You're not saying it's wrong. You're naming a specific area of concern.
Or, I have a slightly different perspective on this, if I can share it, which is gentle, respectful, and positions your view as one perspective, rather than the correction of a mistake.
And all of those phrases allow the meeting to continue productively because they introduce the disagreement without creating a confrontational atmosphere.
Which is ultimately what professional meetings need. The ability to surface disagreements and work through them, without it becoming a power struggle or making anyone feel attacked.
Let's talk about a phrase that comes up in meetings quite often. Let's take this offline. What does that mean, and when should you use it?
Good one. So, taking something offline in a meeting context means, let's not discuss this in the meeting. Let's have a separate conversation about it afterward.
And it's usually used when a topic has come up that's either too detailed for the full group, or too sensitive to discuss openly, or just not relevant enough to the main agenda to use the meeting's time.
So if two people start going back and forth about a very specific technical detail, someone might say, I think this is really important, but should we take it offline so we don't hold up the rest of the group?
Which is a polite way of saying, this conversation is happening, but not here, not now. And both people can agree and move on, and then follow up properly afterward.
It's a really useful phrase, and knowing it means you won't be confused if someone says it to you. Or you can use it yourself to manage a conversation that's going off track.
There's also circle back, which means to return to something later. Let's circle back to that at the end of the meeting. Or, can we circle back to this next week once we have more information?
And action point, or action item, which is a task that someone is committed to doing as a result of the meeting. So the action point there is for Julia to check internal capacity by Thursday.
An agenda, of course. The list of topics to be covered in the meeting. And AOB, which stands for any other business. The catch-all item at the end where people can raise things that weren't on the original agenda.
Knowing those phrases means you can navigate meeting structures much more easily, because meetings often follow a pattern. Agenda items, discussions, action points, AOB, and if you know that structure, you're never completely lost.
Let's talk about ending a meeting well, because the end of a meeting is just as important as the beginning. A good meeting ending makes sure that everyone knows what was decided, what happens next, and who is responsible for what.
And in English language meetings, it's very common for the chair to do a verbal summary at the end, going through the key decisions and action points before closing.
And it's perfectly fine, and actually quite professional, to contribute to that summary. To say, and I think we also agreed that, or just to add to that, I'll send the revised figures by Friday.
Which reinforces your commitment and ensures it's on record.
And then the meeting closes, usually with something warm. Thank you all. That was a really productive session. Or, thanks everyone. I'll send out the notes shortly. Or simply, thanks for your time today. Speak soon.
And those closing phrases are worth knowing, because sometimes in a meeting you're not sure if it's over. And being able to recognize the signals that the meeting is wrapping up helps you prepare your final contributions.
Or decide that you have one more thing to say before the door closes.
Aha, yes. Just before we finish, can I quickly raise one more thing? That's a classic meeting move.
And it's completely acceptable as long as you do keep it quick.
Let's talk a bit about the cultural dimension, because English language meetings, especially in professional settings, have particular cultural norms, and understanding those norms helps you participate more comfortably.
Right. So one thing that's quite distinctive about meetings in many English-speaking professional cultures is that there's a strong emphasis on structure, on having an agenda, on keeping to time, on ending with clear outputs.
Which might feel quite formal to people from cultures where meetings are more fluid, where the conversation might wander and the agenda is more of a suggestion than a strict plan.
And neither approach is inherently better. But if you're in an English language professional meeting and you come from a more fluid meeting culture, it's worth being aware that the pace might be faster, the topics more bounded, and the expectation of clear decisions more pronounced.
And in those settings, going off on a long tangent is not always welcome, even if what you're saying is interesting, because the chair is usually managing time quite carefully.
So, keeping your contributions clear and relatively concise is generally a good approach. It's not about saying less. It's about saying what you mean directly, without a lot of preamble.
And there's also the cultural expectation of preparation. In many professional English language meetings, people are expected to have read the agenda and any pre-reading materials before the meeting starts, and to come with some thoughts already formed.
Which means the meeting itself isn't always the place where people first encounter the ideas. It's the place where people who've already thought about the ideas come together to discuss and decide.
And knowing that changes how you prepare. If you're attending a meeting, it's worth spending even 10 or 15 minutes beforehand thinking about the topics, just so you're not encountering everything cold.
And even just having one or two thoughts ready. I think X is a concern, or I was wondering about Y, means you have something to contribute, rather than just reacting to others all the time.
And contributing, even once or twice in a meeting, is important. Because in English language professional culture, people who never speak in meetings can sometimes be seen as disengaged, even if internally they're paying close attention.
Which is a cultural thing worth knowing. Visible participation, even in small ways, signals that you're present and engaged.
So, even something simple like nodding visibly on a video call, or saying, yes, that makes sense, or I agree with that point out loud. Those small contributions matter.
They signal that you're in the room, not just physically, but mentally.
Let's do one final role play. A full meeting from start to finish, short but complete. Let's say it's a weekly check-in between two colleagues.
Perfect. I'll open it. Okay. Morning, Adam. Thanks for joining. How are you doing?
Good, thanks. Busy week, but I'm well. You?
Same. Okay, let's get into it. I just have a few things to cover today. First, a quick update on the client report. Second, a decision we need to make on the presentation format. And then, any questions or anything else you want to raise. Sound good?
Yes, perfect.
Great. So the client report first. I finished the first draft. I'm fairly happy with it, but I want your eyes on the data section before I send it. There are a couple of figures I'm not 100% sure about.
Sure, I can look at that. Can you send it over today?
Yes, I'll send it straight after this. Now, the second thing. The presentation on Thursday. I've been going back and forth on whether to use slides or just talk through it with a document on screen. What's your instinct?
That's a good question. I think it depends on the audience, honestly. This client tends to be quite detail-oriented, so I'm wondering if the document approach might work better. It feels more like you're walking them through something together rather than presenting at them.
I was thinking the same, actually. And it's also less pressure to make everything look polished. I can just focus on the content.
Exactly. And if they want to go back to something, it's easier to navigate a document than slides.
Okay, let's go with the document format then. I'll adjust the structure a bit so it reads well on screen. Anything else from your side?
Just one thing. I had a call with the regional team yesterday, and they mentioned they might want to be included in the Thursday call. I said I'd check with you before confirming anything. Is that okay?
Oh, that's fine in principle, but it might change the dynamic a bit. Can you find out who exactly would be joining and what they're hoping to get from it? And then we can decide.
Will do. I'll ping them today and let you know.
Great, okay. So to summarize, you're going to review the data section of the report today. We've decided on document format for Thursday. And you're going to check with the regional team about who wants to join and why. Does that sound right?
Yes, that covers it.
Perfect. Thanks, Adam. I'll let you get on with your day.
Cheers. Speak later.
So that was a complete meeting from start to finish. And it was efficient. Maybe 5 or 6 minutes. But everything happened. There was a warm-up, an agenda, clear topics, a decision, a question raised, and a summary with action points.
And nothing was overly formal. It was professional but natural. The kind of conversation that feels easy when you know the patterns.
And the patterns are learnable. They really are. Once you've heard them enough and tried them enough, they start to feel like your own.
Let's bring things home. If you're preparing for a meeting in English this week, a few things to keep in mind. Read the agenda in advance if there is one. Have 1 or 2 thoughts ready on each topic, and plan one moment where you'll contribute, even something small.
And during the meeting, don't be afraid to ask for clarification. Don't be afraid to say, just to make sure I understand. Or, could you say a bit more about that? Those questions are never out of place.
And when you want to contribute, use a signal phrase. Could I just add something? Or, if I can come in on that? It's the polite door knock before you enter the conversation.
And at the end, listen for the summary. And if something was missed or unclear, that's your moment. Just to add to that. Or I also wanted to confirm that those are clean, confident closing contributions.
You've got this. Meetings are just conversations with a little more structure. And conversations are something you've been practicing this whole series.
In episode 10, we're going to look at something that connects to everything we've done so far. How to build and maintain professional relationships in English. The small conversations, the check-ins, the emails, the moments that add up to real trust over time.
Because language is the foundation of relationships. And at B2 level, you have the language to build really meaningful professional connections in English.
We can't wait to explore that with you. Until then, take care of yourselves. Keep practicing. And the next time you're in a meeting in English, remember, you belong in that conversation.
Goodbye, everyone. This is Think and Speak English. See you in episode 10.
Bye. See you next time.